KKR are the 2024 winners of the IPL. That's great. Lots of people can tell you that. I want to get into the how and why, because that is exactly what we do here on Good Areas.
If you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months, plus gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a blocker protects the stumps with NordVPN today.
How about the fact that their bowlers got good? In fact, if you go back and listen to a lot of the reasons I wasn't rating them as a team early in the season, it's because Chakravarti and Stark were bad, and the rest of their bowling outside of their own just didn't really stack up. Unless there was a change there, it was very hard to see how this was going to go well for them, right? And yet, throughout the tournament, they got a lot better as a bowling unit. They probably still aren't a great death bowling unit, but they found out a way around being good at the death by being incredible early on. So their death numbers are great because they kept bowling to tail enders at the end. They took 57 out of their last 60 available wickets, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And someone told me that was the most ever in a 6-game run. What that meant was they were constantly stopping partnerships. And this was not outside of probably Narayan, an economically based bowling attack. Chakravarti can go for runs. Stark can go for runs. Russell goes for a lot of runs. And then you had a couple of younger Indian seamers. They had a lot of guys who could go for runs, but they took so many wickets. It's a ridiculous amount of wickets. But let's just focus on the 2 best bowlers. Mitchell Stark and Varun Chakravarti got a lot better. And I think when I was doing all my different power rankings, and I always had KKR too low for KKR fans, it was because I was waiting for at least one of those bowlers to show up in this tournament. Well, Varun Chakravarti, after a bit of a slow start, certainly did that. And once that happened, it allowed them to actually build on something. And then at the end of the tournament, obviously, Mitchell Stark also got better. This is huge, right? This is what they needed. They now had 3 top-line bowlers they could trust when they got to the playoffs. In a tournament that was mostly about people hitting sixes, that was a huge advantage. But what Chakravarti's form really allowed for was, for the first time with the ball, they had one part of the game working, right? By the end of the year, they had more than that. But by halfway through the season, the ability to take wickets and also restrict runs in that middle order meant that they could put a lot of pressure on teams. That really changed them as a side. And from that point forward, they started to look a little bit more whole. They still had gaps within their games, but when Chakravarti and Narayan formed a partnership in the middle, and let's be honest, sometimes they would come on as early as, the 4th over? Sometimes they would bowl all the way to the death. That meant that from the 4th over to the 18th, you always had the threat of them coming on. And because Narayan wasn't just economical and took wickets, it meant that they were completely in control of that middle section. But there was one other thing that I thought sort of happened a little bit towards the start of the season. And I thought, well, this is just, a little bit of luck and will disappear. It was not luck. Andre Russell kept taking wickets. This is a lot of wickets for a man with no knees left. You sort of look at this lineup and you think to yourself, he might have even been the 6th bowler. Well, he definitely went back to that peak Andre Russell 5th bowler position. We know he's going to go for runs. He went for runs. He kind of has always gone for runs, but him bowling short specifically, and he bowled a lot of balls. He bowled more bounces than he bowled length balls. Who does that? He really went all in on the short ball and was very, very good at it. And he kept taking wickets all the way through. That is absolutely huge. And that allowed for one other thing to happen. I would say that obviously Bumrah and probably Shami at his best is an S-tier Indian seamer. Then you've got a lot of A-tier Indian seamers who are sometimes good, sometimes not as good. And then you have, B, C, D, etc. Harshit and Aurora at best are probably B-tier level and probably at times were C level, right? And yet this season, Harshit took an awful lot of wickets. I loved his slow ball. He bowled pretty fast at times as well. And then towards the end of the season, although to be fair, you could say for a long period of time, Aurora was really good. He was actually nominated for one of our best new ball bowlers. In fact, both of those guys were nominated for awards this year. But because they both did their individual jobs, it meant that both of them could be used for their roles. Harshit was used later on. We didn't have to worry about him with the new ball that often. Aurora was used early on. we know he can go for runs. He didn't have to come back as often. But the second thing that Aurora allowed for, and it's really more to do with Stark, was because Aurora and Stark started swinging the ball. Very much towards the end of the season for Stark, but Aurora did well pretty much all the way through. Remember what I said about that middle lock? Knowing that you have Narayan and Chakravarti who can take wickets, who won't go for many runs, and can lock one section. Now think about what I just said, because the power play became a strength by the end of the season as well. New ball wickets are huge for KKR when you know that Narayan is going to come on, when you know that Chakravarti is going to come on. Suddenly, that puts a lot more pressure on any team who's lost 1, 2, or 3 wickets than it normally would. You're going from a very, very awkward position to hell on earth of trying to score it more than a runner ball off Narayan in this kind of form. Trying to score regularly against Chakravarti without taking risks that might lose your wicket. That was huge. Now, remember that they also had Andre Russell in this section and Harshit. That meant that they had 4 different players who all through the year took more wickets than you would normally assume they would. That is absolutely huge. If you could swing the ball in the first 3 overs and then you can bowl through to the 15th or the 16th while keeping pressure on, it doesn't really matter as much if you can't bowl well at the death. Because half the time, certainly in the back half of the year, when they were bowling at the death, they almost already had the team all out. But there was one very other important thing that helped the KKR win this particular game. The Sunrisers that they were playing at the end of the season was not the Sunrisers at various stages through the year. And you could argue that Rajasthan was also in a position like that, but KKR never even had to play Rajasthan, which is probably another bonus for them. But the Sunrisers were always due to regress because they had too many players in the top 1% of their all-time form at the start of the season. There's no way that you could keep that up. So even if you go back to normal good form, they were going to regress. The fact that some of them, like Travis Head, completely dropped off was always going to be a bit of an issue. There was no way that wasn't going to happen. But to get 2 games in a row against the Sunrisers where they essentially could not make runs, KKR get a lot of credit for that because of the amount of wickets and all the good bowling I said. But also, we do know there is an element of the pitches playing a part, the regression of the Sunrisers, and just sometimes you get the toss right or wrong on that day. And just to go into the pitch, when we're talking about KKR today, they got the best conditions of the final. They did lose the toss, so it's not like the toss went their way and this was a toss game or anything like that. And also, maybe the pitch changed a little bit in the second innings, but chasing 114 made it a lot easier. I'm more than willing to put all those things out there. I think that's a good discussion and a good way of thinking about it. However, the ball was not swinging as much for as long in the second innings as it did in the first, and it didn't seem anywhere near as much from what I could tell, and it didn't seem for anywhere near as long either. So they certainly got a lot of that. It may not have mattered anyway because they were chasing 114, and even if the wicket was exactly the same as it was in the first innings, their ability to just knock it around if they wanted to would have worked. And also, let's say they did lose 3 wickets inside the first 3 overs. Remember that this is a side that can afford to have Ramandeep bat at number 9 pretty much all the year through. And the amount of times we thought to ourselves this year, ooh, Kolkata have lost some wickets. And then you looked at their batting lineup and just be like, because of the impact sub, they could almost set up teams that bat to like number 10 or number 11 if they wanted to get really funky with things. Their all-round skill and the fact that, they got so much out of some of their all-rounders as well with bat and with ball was absolutely huge. But just seeing Ramandeep's name at number 9 meant that you always felt really comfortable. How about this? Rinku Singh essentially felt like he had his season off. That was the way that Rob Barron put it. Last year, it felt like they were Rinku or bust so many times. And this year, there wasn't that many times that Rinku was even a factor. In fact, I'm not even sure I thought about Rinku Singh during this final game, and maybe even the semi-final, or the other final, whatever. There's so many names for the finals, but you know what I'm talking about there. And on top of that, if you go back and you have a look at how many balls Ramandeep batted, how many balls Rinku batted, and how many balls that Dre Russ batted. Dre Russ was arguably getting back to one of his peak form periods coming into this IPL. He played a great innings against the Sunrisers early on, but we didn't really see him all that much after that. Not that he ever looked in terrible form, it's just that he didn't have to do anything special. Again, that's huge. If Rinku Singh and Dre Russ don't have to do anything special and you still win a season like this, how well are you playing? Also, on the Dre Russ innings and beating Sunrisers, probably a pretty good matchup for them, this particular side, right? They're a team who can more or less match the power of the Sunrisers with the bat, and they are a better bowling team, and they have spinners, and they can take wickets. There's a lot of things that match up really well, specifically with the Sunrisers here. But I also want to talk about their batting order. I think one thing they don't get enough credit for is the fluidity of their batting order and how clever they are. Shreyas Iyer aside, sometimes Shreyas Iyer still got his batting position wrong a couple of times early on in the season. Outside of that, they are really clever with the way that they look for matchups. They put the players in the right areas. Everyone is maximized, right? And it's hard to do when you bat down to number 9 because someone's always going to miss out. But it felt like they really thought about it a lot. And the one thing I like is they are willing to move the 2 Iers all the way down. But the other side of this is how good the Iers are. They have 2 anchor batters there, right? We know Venki is incredibly consistent at making 50s. Shreyas Iyer has been a very good spin-hitting anchor for a long time, even if he doesn't have a great strike rate. So they have 2 players with those kinds of records. But we also know that Shreyas will come out from time to time and try and slog early on. He's not afraid of doing that. It may not be his first inkling or even his second or third inkling, but he can do it. Whereas Venki will either play like a proper anchor for you or come out and play like a proper hitter, which means you almost get 2 roles in one player. He's not as good as Shreyas. He's not as good as many other IPL players in this IPL, but he's particularly good at that. And it's a really good skill to have to come out and play whichever innings your team needs at the right time. It's almost more important than being a slightly better player who plays the same way over and over again. But I do want to talk about luck. Not just all the wickets and playing the Sunrisers and you know, all these things that went for them, but specifically the opening partnership. Phil Salt was undrafted. Anyone could have gone and got Phil Salt. He was available for all, right? No one else thought he was that good. Those of us who'd seen him play very, very recently in the 6 months prior to the IPL had probably started to turn. But overall in cricket, people were still not sure how good Phil Salt was. Jason Roy pulls out. Phil Salt ends up being one of the best openers in this tournament. That's already lucky. Then you have Sunil Narine, who probably had, up until the last couple of games, the luckiest run of any batter I've ever seen. The amount of chances that he gave that were dropped, the amount of times he was completely out of control with the shot he was playing and still got it away for a 4 or a 6, or just played and missed at that one and didn't get an edge, whatever it may be, was remarkable. They ended up with an undrafted opener and a guy who was averaging, I think, 4 in the series before this as an opening batter, as they won on them a lot of games. That opening partnership won them an awful lot of games. To a certain point where I thought Salt going home might have been more important than Butler going home for Rajasthan, just because so many of their wins seemed to come from those 2 openers just going absolutely berserk at everyone. By the time they got to the finals, it was a very different kind of tournament, and that didn't matter as much. But they won a lot of games early on through that partnership. And what about Narine? I wrote a piece at the beginning of last year or the year before where I was saying that this might be there's still a lot to like about Narine, and people have forgotten how good he is, but it seemed like KKR was getting colder on him. They weren't as sure. They weren't as positive. I still thought there was a lot left in him as a cricketer, partly because just how smart he is and his ability to evolve and make things right. Sunil Narine, in his wildest fantasy, probably didn't think he had a season like this available to him at the moment. That was absolutely one of the craziest, best seasons we have ever seen. It was one of the craziest and one of the best seasons we've ever seen. It may be the craziest season, and it may be the best season we have ever seen. It was just ridiculous. I've got him as a top 3 bowler in this tournament. We had him on the awards ballot. Obviously, Bumrah was ahead of him. He's not that far away from being the second best bowler. What was he? In the top 10 batters as well? When you look at the amount of runs he made, when you look at the impact that he had, when you look at the fear factor that he brought, at worst, let's say he's in the top 15 batters, not in the top 10 batters, because there's a lot of good batting this year. What a combination that is. Have we ever seen a tournament like this before? I just did my big MVP piece on the IPL seasons last year, so I don't know if I have the ability to go back and have another look at one. But this was absolutely remarkable. And we can talk about little things about how they put things together. They went with him as an opener. You have to give them credit for that. And he bowled way better than he has in the last few seasons. All of that said, this is well above what we thought Sunil Narine was going to give. And there's no one at KKR that thought Sunil Narine was going to be scoring over 350 runs this year. I can't remember how long ago he went past 350 runs. It felt like midway through the tournament. And then the last thing that I do think needs to get mentioned is they got a lot of rest right at the end of this tournament. I've been on these, road shows. You get tired, players get injured, you're traveling, all these sorts of things. And rest can go two ways. Sometimes your players just lose their form. Everyone's playing really good and then they're not playing as much. And that can be a real issue. But the reason I put a bet on Kolkata to win this during the last game was not because I thought Kolkata was massively better than the Sunrisers Rajasthan. I just think they're better than Rajasthan, certainly by the end of the season. And I thought they were better than the Sunrisers. But the bet was based on the fact that game on Friday night was about as grueling as any T20 game I have seen. I've never seen so many players with so many issues in the heat in a T20 game. And I was like, how on earth is that team going to come back and win in the final? And they didn't. So Kolkata played an absolute fortune for Mitchell Starc, and he decided to pay them back at the very last minute. Kolkata backed Sunil Narine, and even they could not believe what was going to come from him. Phil Salt was undrafted. Harshit and Aurora absolutely playing their roles perfectly. Andre Russell still getting something out of his knees. The Ayers doing their jobs absolutely perfectly. And Ramandeep and Rinku almost having a season off. And yet they won the finals really, really easily. What a brilliant season this has been for KKR. They are definitely worthy winners of this weird high-scoring, then low-scoring edition of the IPL. And a huge thanks to all the viewers. We obviously have videos going all the way back to the start of the tournament and probably previous IPLs if you want to go back that far. Please like, please subscribe, put your comments up. And remember, we're going to be back for the World Cup and you need to tell everybody.
If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.